Hey there, creative friends! It's time for a little bit of sunshine in your lives as we dive into the world of art and reviews. Today we're looking at a pencil that's missing most of the pencil. Direct from Czechoslovakia, this brand is from one of the oldest stationery companies in the world. It's now famous for being one of the most popular woodless, not just woodless, but barrelless pigment-only pencils. This pencil is nothing but core, and that's apparently going to provide for us today 5 times the colour as a regular pencil. I give you the Koh-I-Noor Progresso Coloured Pencils. Today we are continuing our journey of reviewing all the pencils with one that's been suggested to me many times. The Koh-I-Noor Progresso Coloured Pencil is the first core-only pencil I've had the pleasure of reviewing, and I'm keen as mustard to see what all the fuss is about. Vibrant saturation, amazing handling, and very weird looking. These are all things I've been told about these pencils. Is any of that true? Why? Let's take a look at them and find out. What we have here is the Koh-I-Noor Progresso set of 12, and it's a little smaller and petite than I thought it would be. The first thing I noticed is the packaging. It's a cardboard slip. While it is cute, simple and attractive, it is very simple in design and the colours are strangely muted. It has a sort of retro styling in the palette with a red and white design that does make it feel a little Eastern European. At the top of the package we have the Koh-I-Noor's logo. Beneath it, over a picture of the pencils, is the pencil range being Progresso. And below that we have a small window where we can see the actual pencils themselves to get an idea of the colours. At the bottom, the information in English and Czech is 12 woodless coloured pencils. Let me just put it out here, for something so small, picking this pack up, it is surprisingly very heavy. The pencils slide out of the cardboard sleeve in a plastic drawer-like packet. Considering the weight of the pencils, the packaging actually now feels a bit flimsy. I'm a little bit concerned that the tray might just slide out and will break all our pencils. At least we can now see all the pencils, which is a broad range, but again muted in colour. Now, as I try and get one of these pencils out, it's actually not super easy. They have not spared any space between the pencils and the packaging here. As I'm looking at these pencils, there's these strange dots on some of them. The green particularly is bad, with orange spots going throughout the length of the pencil. I really don't want to be too rough, as I don't want to snap the tip off any of the other pencils, which apparently has already happened to the yellow here. The black tray isn't really anything special. At the top of it, there's these little indents for the lead, and the dividers are quite shallow. I think they're deep enough, but I'm not sure if I'd store my Progressos in this pack once I've started using them. At first glance, I don't really know how I feel about these pencils. They seem exceptionally delicate and fragile. They feel brittle, and for anyone who's a little rougher, I'd be worried I was going to break them. The packaging doesn't sort of fit the pencils. I would expect them to come in something a bit more secure, because as soon as you pick it up, this drawer-like packet with the pencils slides out. And if you're not careful, I'm sure they'd smash everywhere. We're just gonna have to make sure we're careful in these tests. The Koh-I-Noor Hardmouth website is one of the more clunkier websites I've scoured for pencil information. Once you find the part that actually has the stuffs, you can see they have a lot of art supplies. It's an easy site to get lost on, wondering what the heck something is. And once you find your way to the pencil section, and then the woodless pencil section, we can see the Progressos come in sets of 6, 12, and 24, so no bigger boxes. Koh-I-Noor really doesn't offer much info on the site about the pencils other than the dimensions of the box you buy. In the Progresso range, there is also a 6 pencil fluoro set, of which you can buy each pencil individually, and a couple of gift boxes, including the standard wooden box and a quite elegant hidden diamond set, which folds out to make a desk display and holder. Koh-I-Noor seems aware of its delicacy of the pencils, because if you look further, they sell plastic stands to protect the pencils. These pencils are a fine round barreled pencil. The length of the overall pencil is a short 150 millimeters from tip to tail, and the diameter is a fairly slim 7.38 millimeters. The core of these pencils are oil-based and spans the whole of the pencil's diameter, with a thin coating of plastic or paint for ease of movement over the whole of the pencil. These pencils are also our heaviest, so I'm putting a weight here with them individually weighing in at 18 grams each. The design of this pencil is quite interesting. it's all core, which the entirety of the tip is made up of, and it runs all the way down to the end in its coating. The font choice looks almost like a retro game or pixel art. I suspect though it's just remnants of Soviet era printing. Near the tip end we have a barcode, followed by a mystery number, which could be a batch number, and the name Progresso. Further along is Koh-I-Noor and a second piece of text which I'm taking to be the color code. There is no indentation on any part of the pencil, which means the whole pencil is lusciously smooth and it's unusually cool to handle. The pencil is covered head to toe with what I guess is colored plastic, or possibly it's dipped in paint. I'm assuming it's a measure to protect the Progresso's delicate nature, but also so the color won't come off on your fingers. Whatever it is, it has a curved end which suits these pencils and feels like it'll fit very comfortably in the hand. With the Koh-I-Noor Progresso pencils, I like the design and look of these pencils. They feel like they fit my hand well, and while the weight of them is quite heavy, I quite like it. This opinion might change as I start using them for longer periods of time, but we'll have to see. Texturally, I like the fact that these pencils are glossy and cool, and because there's no embossing on the barrel, they feel sleek and smooth. Overall, the pencil is very comfortable, if very short. While the lettering on the pencil isn't the most professional in comparison to other art pencils, it feels unique and a little bit industrial, which is fun. I usually really value pencils that have color all over them because it makes them easier to find. And these pencils have that, but looking at the kit, the color doesn't seem to match the color of the lead. We'll do a color match a little bit later, but initial thoughts are that this test they won't do super well in. Also, I don't like that several colors seem to have spots on the barrel. I'm hoping it's just in the coating, but we'll have to see. So that's the physical side of our Koh-I-Noor Progresso pencils. Next, we're going to do a series of tests, some of which are a little bit scientific, while others rely more on how we feel about these pencils at the time. So, our first test up today is saturation and vibrancy. Let's go play with some saturation and vibrancy. I'm interested to see how well these pencils perform, as a primary advertisement point for them is how vibrant they are. I'm hoping, based on previous reviews, for an incredibly rich saturation and vibrancy. Again, the branding is that they're supposed to be 5 times as good at putting down pigment as other pencils. That's a big claim. This test basically tests consistency across weights and the hardness of the lead and the vibrancy of the pigment. The Koh-I-Noor pencil is an oil-based pencil. Oil usually gives a harder core, which generally means it holds its shape well and it should work better with details, but they often don't put down as much pigment. What will happen with these pencils? Let's go find out. Because it would take a very long time to test all the pencils in these packs, I'm going to pick 4 colors plus our black and white. We'll run these tests on each of these and then assess the results. The colors I've chosen for the Koh-I-Noor tests are red 8750-9, green 8750-4, blue 8750-6, yellow 8750-1, white 8750-3, and black 8750-12. The way I'm going to be doing this test is by drawing with our pencils at different weights. Today we're using 5 different pressures: 25 gram, 50 gram, 100 gram, 200 grams, and 400 grams. Very light to very heavy. So the Progresso are a 100% woodless pencil. How will a core-only pencil react to these pressures? I'm a bit scared they might just break into 1,000 pieces in the higher pressures, but let's see what happens. Also, FYI, these are my fancy kitchen scales for our scientific tests, so they may jump about a bit throughout this test. And the paper is just generic white mixed media 120 GSM paper. Let's start out our saturation and vibrancy test. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is take my red pencil and do my first test, which is of course the 25 grams. Now it is going down quite pigmented and quite saturated for a 25 gram weight. Let's dive into our green now. Our green is very similar with the saturation and vibrancy. It's quite unusual to see a pencil that is this saturated at this amount of weight, because the weight here isn't actually particularly heavy. 25 grams is not a lot. Time for our blue pencil now. This is maintaining that same level of consistency and it being super vibrant and super saturated at this 25 gram mark. And for our yellow here, yellow can be a little bit different because the pigment is a little bit lighter. And that's true. It's still a little bit saturated and vibrant, but not quite as saturated and vibrant as the other colors. Now for the black. And the black is coming in very strong at that 25 gram weight. Let's move into the 50 grams now and see what happens. Okay, so our red is starting us off nice and strong in the 50 grams. However, I don't know that the saturation and vibrancy has gotten all that much more. Taking up our green now, and I would say that has doubled in saturation and vibrancy. So from the 25 gram to the 50 gram, I would say we've seen 100% of an increase in saturation and vibrancy here. Now for our blue, and we have stepped up a little bit in saturation and vibrancy. I don't know that I would say that that's 100% of an increase, but it definitely has gone up in saturation. Let's see if our yellow has gone up with the going up in pressure. And we definitely have gone up in saturation and vibrancy in our yellow. Maybe not 100%, but it is still an increase. And now for our black, the saturation and vibrancy has stepped up a little bit, but I wouldn't say it's 100% of an increase. We have a little bit of an increase in our black. Let's come into the 100 grams now. Now, 100 grams is one of those sweet spots for most pencils, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Honestly, I don't think the red here has gone up in saturation all that much at all. In fact, I would say that it's very, very similar to the 50 grams in weight. Same with the green. The green doesn't seem to have increased all that much with the increase of pressure. Let's see how the blue goes. I would say it's a very similar story here with the blue. We aren't really moving up in saturation and vibrancy as we're moving up in pressure. Let's see how the yellow goes. A very similar story here. We haven't really seen much of an increase in saturation and vibrancy from the 50 gram to the 100 gram pressure. Lastly, let's check out that black. This might have shifted a little bit, but not very much. Not as much as I would expect going from a 50 grams worth of pressure to 100 grams. Let's see what the 200 grams has in store for us. Interestingly, that red is actually a lot more saturated and vibrant than it was in the 100 grams. It's definitely turned up the volume in terms of that brightness and saturation. The green, not so much. The green is very similar to the 100 grams. The blue, however, has given us a little bit more oomph with this 200 gram weight, which is great. And now for our yellow, let's see if we can actually start to see it. We can! This is actually a great increase for the yellow from the 100 gram to the 200 grams. And now for our black. This again is very similar to the 100 grams compared to the 200 grams. Really interesting. Rightio, let's see what happens at the most pressure that we can put down, which is the 400 grams. Straight away we can see with this red that saturation and vibrancy is really coming home at that 400 gram weight. Let's see how the green goes. And similarly, we've at least had our 100% increase in that green from the 200 gram to the 400 grams. These pencils really seem to thrive at this harder weight. And again, our blue giving us all of the saturation and vibrancy at that 400 gram weight. Let's see what happens with our yellow this time. We can see that the saturation and vibrancy on this yellow pencil is a lot more saturated than the 200 grams was. I don't know whether it's double the amount of saturation and vibrancy as you would expect for a doubling of pressure, but it's still a lot brighter. Now for our black. Will we get a crisp black here? And we have! This is definitely where these pencils shine. The 400 gram mark, they're much more saturated and much more vibrant. Flicking over to our white pencil now, will we find the same thing? Will we get the super saturation at the higher weights here, or will it be totally different? Starting off with the 25 gram, we are finding that it is already super saturated for a 25 gram weight. The 50 gram, however, hasn't gone all that much more saturation and vibrancy than the 25 grams. The 100 grams is starting to get a bit more vibrant in that white, but just a little bit. And now for our 200 grams, we're definitely seeing an increase in the vibrancy and saturation here. Lastly, our 400 grams. Yes, this has definitely proved that these pencils are so much more vibrant and saturated at those heavier weights. That was the saturation and vibrancy test. These pencils are very interesting. These pencils are very pigmented and obviously extremely vibrant. They do put down a lot of pigment at every single pressure, which means at the lower pressures that they are still very pigmented. They are also not very consistent in their steps up in the saturation as we go up in pressure. There's a whole weight here with the 100 grams where pretty much the saturation didn't change from the 50 gram weight. But I guess they're supposed to be a highly saturated pencil, and you know what? They are. The white pencil did surprisingly well here, but for the amount of saturation the coloured pencils put down, I thought that the 400 grams in the white would be a lot more vibrant. I did feel in the higher weights that I was pushing my luck a bit, and I expected the pencils to snap at any moment. But they didn't, which is a relief as it would be a very short test. Something else I noticed as I was using these pencils is that they get quite messy as they leave a lot of residue behind. Usage-wise, these pencils are also relatively comfortable to use. I was worried they might be tiring over time due to the thinness and the weight, but both are something you get used to very quickly. The heavy weight also means I'm not having to put as much weight down to achieve each pressure. On our scale of A to F, with S being superb, let's look at how these 5 colours perform together and aggregate them. For this test, it was tricky to know how to score the Progresso. On one hand, these pencils are super saturated and vibrant, which is what they promised, but in terms of consistency, which is what most of this test is based on, they performed pretty averagely, lacking any finesse in the light weights. I'm going to compromise and say these pencils got a B+. And this is where our Progressos are going for the saturation and vibrancy test. The next test is the single pencil gradient. I'm going to be using each pencil to make a simple gradient. We're going to make each pencil go as intense as possible to as light as possible. What I want to know here is how these pencils handle the ramping up or down of pressure in an organic way. Will they be too hard to create a seamless gradient? Let's go find out. Let's get started on our single pencil gradient. Now, the single pencil gradient is a practice of working from heavy to light pressures. We've started out well in our red pencil here, however, the midpoint in this gradient isn't really there. And as we've come into the lighter areas, it's a lot harder to see that 25 grams. Similarly, with the green, we start out really well under pressure, but as we hit that midpoint, it's a little bit less of a smooth transition than I would like to see. And now for our blue. Our blue has a little bit more of a smooth transition from that midpoint into the lighter areas. And now for our yellow here. The yellow actually has a little bit of a step down from the heavy pressure into the lighter pressures. We really didn't hit much of that midpoint there at all. And now for our black. I would say that this is quite similar to the yellow actually, where we've got more of a step down from a heavier pressure into that midpoint. And all of these are kind of missing out on our lighter pressures. Let's see if our white pencil's the same. So we're going to start off nice and intense with a really heavy pressure and slowly take off that weight. Slowly. The midpoint here is actually much better than the colours were, but I'm still struggling to find that 25 gram light weight. Again, these pencils were very interesting to use. These pencils are so thick, rich and saturated, it's pretty impressive actually. They are so thick and rich that they're edging toward being a crayon almost. How thick does a pencil have to be before being classed as a crayon? It's a good question. So let's have a look at the gradient. While we have amazing saturation throughout, again, I did find it very difficult to get to those lighter pressures. I thought I'd really backed off and pulled off my pressure for the 25 gram, but it doesn't look like it in the gradients. It looks the same weight, or at least very similar to the 50 gram pressure area. This is echoed in the white test. One thing I do like about these pencils is they are what they say they are. They are super saturated, vibrant pencils. Even at the lighter pressures, you get intense color, whether you want it or not. The pencil feel is pretty nice too. While creating the gradient, the physical size of the pencil has been growing more familiar and is now quite comfortable. It feels quite smooth and silky to put down. Okay, let's grade these pencils for our gradient test. Using our scale, for the Koh-I-Noor Progresso pencils, I was initially going to give them a B because they really can't seem to give us that lighter end of the spectrum. But in all other aspects, including saturation and vibrancy, and doing what they're designed to do, they are excellent. Sometimes during these tests, I'm finding that our test breadth is a little bit too limiting. And with that in mind, for this case, I'm going to weigh our results a little bit higher. So for the single pencil gradient test, I'm going to give our Koh-I-Noor a slightly weighted B+. And that's going to put our Progressos right about here for the gradient test. It's time to try our pencils in the blending test. For this test, I'm taking our 4 primary colors, red to green, blue to yellow, and we're going to see how smooth we can blend them. What we want to see is a seamless uniting of the 2 colors and if they will mix well together. Let's go have a look, shall we? Let's get blending. And to start off our test today, I am taking my red pencil and I am making a gradient. We all know a gradient is the process of going from a heavy pressure to a light pressure as smoothly as possible. And I would say that red gradient is rather nice. Let's see what our green does now. So what we're seeing here is not really a blending in the middle. And if we move from one color to the next, the drop off is a little bit sharper than I'd like. Let's see what happens to the blue and the yellow now. So there's our blue gradient. And we'll move in now with our yellow gradient, which will come up from the bottom to meet that blue. Sadly, they're not blending as well as I'd like them to be. The colors are more remaining separate. These pencils blend okay. Not great, but okay. They are easy to blend and they leave a lovely smooth finish. But the colors remain pretty separate and don't mix much at all. This is likely due to their pigment being so thick and saturated. If we have a close look at where they meet in the middle, we can see that there isn't much of a mixing between the 2 colors, and as we move from the blend into the separate colors, the drop-off is quite sharp, particularly in the blue and yellow. I think part of the great thing about these pencils, and part of the bad thing with these pencils, is that they do what they do really well. They are super saturated and super vibrant with a super thick pigment all the time. They are not very flexible or subtle in the ways they can be used, which makes it a bit tricky to use them for a variety of drawing. So let's grade them on their blending test results. I'm going to give the Progresso pencils a B- for blending. And that's going to put our Progresso right about here. It's time for the white factor test. Will the white pencil layer over the colors? What you see in this test will depend on how you use the white pencil. Some people use the white pencil as a way to blend or lighten colors, others for highlights. Let's see if the Progresso's white works. Let's get started with our white factor. So I'm going to bring in my white pencil here and I'm going to push as hard as I possibly can over 1/2 of our red and green blend. Now we can see that it is making a little bit of a difference here, but it's more blending things together rather than lightening the color. Let's see what happens on the blue and yellow side now. We can actually see that the blue is starting to be a little bit paler, a bit more pastel in color, whereas the yellow is just blending rather than lightening. For such a vibrant pencil, the white is a little bit of a letdown. I thought if any pencil would dominate in the whites, it would be these, but unfortunately, it's just simply not super strong. I feel like the addition of the white is helping in blending the colors together much better than they were before, which is great for the Progresso because the blend before was not fantastic. The main areas where we can see the color changes from the white is in the green and the blue, while the yellow is particularly hard to see any difference in at all. I'm giving Koh-I-Noor Progresso Coloured Pencils a B for the white factor test. And that result is going to put our Progresso pencils right about here for the white factor. Okay, so the colour accuracy test. In this test, we measure the external colour of the pencil to the pigment the pencil puts down. A good pencil looks similar, paint to pigment. A bad, not so much. I'm very curious to see how these pencils stack up against the others because the colour of the outside of the pencil looks so different to the lead. Will these pencils be accurate to their design colour? Let's go find out. Let's see how well our pencils go for colour accuracy. First off, we're going for our red. The red is a little bit pinker than I thought it would be, with the pigment is a bit brighter than the pencil itself. The green, the pigment is definitely a lot darker than the pencil barrel. And the pencil barrel on the blue is a lot lighter than the pigment it's put down. The yellow is fairly similar, while the black is a little bit lighter in the pigment that it's put down, whereas the barrel is a little bit darker. Well, the results are in and the Progresso's colour accuracy sucks, which to be fair is not really a surprise. This annoys me no end because it's not a complex requirement, particularly with these pencils, as all they had to do was whack a clear piece of light fast plastic over the barrel and they would have been perfect. Instead, we have these off-colour plastic sleeves, which are an absolutely awful colour match, especially in the blue and the green. So sadly, this is going to pull our Progresso pencils down quite a lot. They receive a C in colour accuracy. So our Progresso for colour accuracy is going to sit right about here. Okay, it's time for the break factor test, and normally this test is my favourite, but today I'm pretty nervous. This whole pencil is the lead. If I push too hard, will the whole dang pencil snap? While I feel like this test is super risky, this is a very important test. It shows us how hard the lead is. Are these pencils weak or strong? And how consistent the mix is overall. So how much pressure before these pencils' leads break? Let's go find out. To make this test as consistent as possible across all the pencils we're going to review, I've set up a couple of controls. I'm going to sharpen each pencil to a point. I'm then going to dull them slightly by drawing 3 lines at pressure. Basically, this will make sure we don't have a super fine point that will break immediately. I'm then going to be using a 45-degree square to get a consistent angle of pressure. Makes sense? Let's go break some leads. The break test. It is one of my favourite tests for a reason. Let's get the red set up now for our Progresso pencils and see what happens. Starting off with my set square here, and we're going to start putting on the pressure. Here we go. Slowly but surely we're building in the red pencil. And that has snapped at 590 grams. Next we're going to get our green together. And we're just going to dash off the end of that pencil there and get started. This is the most exciting part of all of these tests, is the building up in the pressure, and then it's building, it's building, it's building. Still building. And snap, 745 grams. Alrighty, let's see what happens with our blue pencil now. So far, these pencils haven't been terribly consistent, so we're going to see which side the blue lies on. Let's set it up, get it ready to go, and we'll start putting on our pressure. So we're all ready. 427 grams. For some reason, I thought that was going to go really high, but the total opposite. Anyway, moving on to our yellow. what is going to happen here. Will we have as much pressure as we can with our yellow pencil? So we're going to push it up here. Keep building, keep building, keep building. And 520, so that's a little bit higher. Okay, it's time for the black. Now, we're gonna have to see whether this black is going to be as high a pressure as we have found in the past. A lot of the times, the black pencil has been really hard. So we're building up in pressure, and any second now, there we go, at 674 grams. Okay, that wasn't as high as I thought it might be, but we have the white left to go, and sometimes the white can be either really soft or really hard. So I guess we're going to find out now. So we've started putting on the pressure, and we've climbed very fast here. Like, we're already at 800 grams. There we go, 893 grams. That's the heaviest out of all of our pencils' weights here. Well, we didn't break them. Not unintentionally, that is. The Progresso pencils have an average break point of 642 grams, which puts it on the low end of our break tests. This is relatively consistent with the average numbers we've been getting across these tests. Consistency across the board was fairly poor. Our highest break point was the white at 893 grams, and our lowest was the blue at 427 grams. Often in these tests, the white is an outlier, but taking into account the next highest break point being the green at 745 grams, we have more than 300 grams between our highest and lowest primary colour. Not a very good result at all. The white being as hard as it is also makes sense with our white test results. A softer white here would have scored better. I wasn't sure how these pencils were going to go with the break test, and I was worried we may shatter the entire pencil while we were doing it. We didn't, but due to the short length of the barrel and this stress, I found it to be really tough and uncomfortable to put a lot of pressure on these pencils. They physically hurt at the higher pressures. Obviously, if they were longer, they would be more susceptible to snapping, but it's worth noting you may need tough hands to get the most out of these pencils. Anyway, let's give our Progresso a score for the break test. I'm of two minds here. Most of the colours were okay, but the white was twice the blue. So I'm giving it a C+. And that's going to put them round about here for the break factor. And finally, I want to know if these pencils spark joy or will they cause despair? This test is purely based on my personal opinion and the vibe I get from the Koh-I-Noor Progresso pencils. Design-wise, they've grown on me. The retro look is fun and the weight and size becomes familiar after a while. There still is a feeling of delicacy, which is a real worry, and rightfully so. In doing these tests, I dropped them from my desk and they fell 20 centimeters onto a soft fluffy dog and then carpet. And sure enough, most of the tips broke and the pink snapped. But if you're more careful than I am, very, very careful that is, it shouldn't be an issue. Test-wise, they struggle at the lighter weights, and the white is less useful than a softer white would be. At heavier weights, they really shine, but again, the shorter barrel can become uncomfortable in the hand at these pressures. Colour accuracy and break point both didn't do well. To be fair, I think these are part of the same issue. There appears to have been less care in the manufacturing, which is the possible cause of these problems. I'm so conflicted about these pencils. On one hand, they're amazing at doing what they're supposed to do, and as far as my expectations of a super saturated and pigmented pencil went, they have performed perfectly. But when it comes to the tests themselves, I feel like I've said the same thing again and again. They're okay, not great, just okay. Part of their problem is they seem so inflexible. They do what they do and that's all they do. So I guess if you're someone who wants a super saturated and thickly pigmented pencil for colouring, these are the pencils for you. Anything else, then you may want to reconsider their value. These pencils are the closest I've seen so far, which may not actually spark joy. There's just so much I was expecting that hasn't happened. But for what they are, and their sheer uniqueness, I have to sway on the side of yes, and say yes, they spark joy. The Koh-I-Noor pencils will receive a C+ for my joy factor today. And so for our Progresso pencils today, they're going to sit about there. Now, before we finish up, these tests are fairly generic for all pencils, so sometimes they miss important elements in unique pencils like these. This pencil is woodless, and because of that, it has a unique characteristic. Techniques that people use with charcoal sticks and crayons can be applied with these pencils. One obvious one is that we can shade and draw with a much wider section of the pencil. And if that's for you, that may sway you in deciding to get these pencils. So let's give ourselves an overall score for the Koh-I-Noor Progresso pencils. I'm going to aggregate all our scores we got today and get the total score for these pencils. The total score for the Koh-I-Noor Progresso Coloured Pencils is a B-. It's time now to put the Koh-I-Noor pencils on the graph we've been building, and they're going to sit about here. Not great, but not bad. The perfect description for these pencils. Anyway, that's it, folks. I hope you liked this video. I thoroughly enjoyed learning about these interesting pencils, and I hope you did too. Please be sure to let me know in the comments what you thought, or if I've missed anything. I would love to know what you think about the Koh-I-Noor Progresso pencils. Keep your ear to the ground, as I have another test out very soon. But for next week's test, we're delving into the darkest of all darks, looking at a paint that's apparently very, very, very black. But as always, if you want more stuff, have a little look around at my links, and if you feel like saying hello, come and hang out with us on Twitch. That's it, my friends. Have a wonderful day. I will talk to you soon. Bye!